We're now going to proceed to the second session, which is formatted very similar to the first session. I do want to remind everyone that this symposium and everything about it is the beginning, not the end. It's our way to inventory what's on people's minds, get feedback, and inventory what's going on in the institution, and taking that back and having AIDA really advance and become something that can advance your use of ChatGPT. So to start our second session off, we thought it very important, and this has been hinted at multiple times today, about having some insight into the ethics of AI and the biases associated. I realize everybody in here is incredibly ethical and may not need this talk, but just in case, it's my pleasure to introduce Wesley Wildman, the professor of theology and faculty of computing and data sciences.
So I always am asked, how does a theologian become a data scientist? The short answer is that I took a couple of degrees in mathematics and was a software developer before I became a philosopher of religion, and then got a job at Boston University as a philosopher of religion. So the development of the Faculty of Computing and Data Sciences here was, for me, incredibly fortunate. Now, a couple of months ago, the consulting company Deloitte produced a landscape study called The State of Ethics and Trust in Technology. There's a quote from that I want to give to you to get you started thinking about ethics. The organisations that will lead in AI are not just those who build the most powerful models, but those who build the most responsible ones. And the issue there is that if you want to do an AI accelerator, if you want to go fast, you must not trip. And one of the ways you can trip is by getting ethics wrong. So thinking from the beginning about ethics and systematically throughout your way of developing artificial intelligence tools is very critical for being able to keep moving. Now, earlier today, we heard from the president that we really need to be doing things in the Boston University way. So I'm going to twist things up a little bit for you and begin by talking about Boston University's history. I don't know if you've heard about Boston personalism, but Boston University is famous for Boston personalism. I'll explain what that is in a minute, but the very first philosopher in the philosophy department at BU was Borden Parker Bown, 1847 to 1910. And he had a student called Edgar Sheffield Brightman, who had a student called Peter Bertocci, and they were the first two holders of the Bown chair, which have run all the way up to the present with Juliet Floyd, who began that chair a couple of years ago. This personalist perspective was very interesting at the start. They had a rather theological take on personalism. They thought that the most real thing in the universe were persons. And that meant that the depth of the universe, the deepest part of the universe, God, was a person. Not all of them went along with that. There were some very serious mystics, like Howard Thurman up there, one of my very favourites, was more of a naturalist in orientation. But they still thought that persons were incredibly important for understanding how human beings have to comport themselves with one another and in relationship to the world. Many of you will know this particular personalist who was deeply affected by this tradition. Personalism gave me a metaphysical basis for the dignity and worth of all human personality. To deprive man of freedom is to relegate him to the status of a thing rather than elevate him to the status of a person. So MLK was one of those traditional supernaturalist personalists, but there were naturalist religious people like Thurman. There are also naturalist human worldviews that assert personalism too. So these would be atheistic naturalists, very common in the university, extreme metaphysical diversity. And yet, despite that diversity of metaphysical orientation, this array of views has yielded a global human rights movement that has been staggering in its ability to catalyse agreement across cultures, across religions, across nations. So you've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from middle of the last century, and a whole host of rights movements that have all flown flowed from this way of thinking about human beings. So what is this way of thinking about human beings? That human beings are valuable, that they're dignified, and our behaviour with one another and in our environments and in our social groups needs to honour that dignity. This becomes a fundamental principle that can guide everything from the way you run an economy to the way you run a school system. So I want to say that person-centred ethics of this kind, in sync with this global human rights movement, is capable of guiding us in AI ethics. Upholding the dignity, value and welfare of all persons is a vital ethical principle that can guide us in what we're doing right now. I'm going to show you some case studies in just a moment, one on research, one on education, one on administration, to show you what the ethical dimensions of the problem look like. But just picture the connection to dignity, value and welfare in a few of these examples. If you read the twin task force reports that were mentioned earlier, you'll see countless examples of applications of AI in the university setting. You won't normally see the ethical implications spelled out, but with a bit of imagination, you can fill that out yourself. So human-in-the-loop computing strategies. This is saying that when you use computational science to do anything, remember that human beings might be affected, take account of the human perspective. In particular, engage stakeholders. Talk to people who could be affected by this. Don't assume that if you're an engineer and very, very clever, that you know exactly how everyone could react to the piece of software that you implement. And sharing high-level compute resources is a critical strategy in response to the ecological challenges that are posed by gigantic server farms that are very energy intensive. And AI is being used all over for all sorts of pro-social research. It's not just to solve technical problems in chemistry. It's also, we're using it in CDS, we're using it in 100 different ways to be able to solve seemingly intractable social problems. So the potential to make society better, faster than we were expecting, is huge because of AI. In education, we spoke about the critical embrace policy and that all professors are supposed to train students how to do critical use. And we learned from a few people about how AI tools are transforming the learning experience. All of those things have to do with human dignity and human welfare. One of the pushes to get this stuff right is this personalist way of thinking about ethics. And even in administration, you can increase productivity while decreasing costs, and maybe you're going to lose some jobs because of that. But at the same time, it's possible to increase the intense pleasure and enjoyment that people get out of work. So there can be a positive upside even to increasing efficiency that increases people's satisfaction, again, directly related to human welfare. All right. In practice, how do you do person-centred AI ethics? All of you have got your own ways of thinking and working. What an amazing day it's been for me listening to you all, incredible. But if you're going to do ethics, there are a few steps that you can follow. First of all, sensing problems. That does not come easy to us. You have to be fairly highly trained, in fact, to be able to sense problems accurately. The students, when we're trying to teach them AI ethics, at the start, they're not very interested at all in ethical issues. The reason why they're going into data science is to build really cool products and make a lot of money. And only a few of them are thinking about ethics. But our surveys show that by the end of the class, going through all of these case studies and seeing the history of their own discipline, they're all worried about ethics. They really care about it because they realise it could be their engineering table that caused a problem that they have to live with thereafter. They start really caring about it. And what's the key to it? It's learning how to sense where there might be a problem. Then you have to be able to analyse options, because our first moral instinct might not be a reliable guide to a rational ethical policy. You have to be able to think critically, even about your own moral sensibilities, when trying to come up with an ethical orientation. Engaging stakeholders is just a critical expression of humility in the face of complexity. You cannot possibly understand how everyone is going to perceive a new product. You have to talk to them. Deliberate on options. It's very important to have more than one possibility to think about, because in the comparative process of analysing more than one option, you start to realise that there's more than one way of seeing a problem, and you can't just argue for the thing you want, which means you're incredibly subject to confirmation bias. You have to even argue for things that you don't want in order to be able critically to assess your options. And then if you stop there, you won't have changed a damn thing. You need to be able to act. You need to be able to implement ideas. And for that, you need to be able to make arguments. And in the tech industry, you need to be able to make arguments without losing your job. So there are skills involved in figuring out how to communicate with skills that we try and teach our students in the ethics classes and CDS. All right, well, let's have a look at some case studies. In research, we saw an example of this already before. AI classifiers can match or exceed the skill of veterans in reading diagnostic images. So that's huge. An exhausted person looking at MRIs or X-rays or something, tired of looking at the 1,000th one for the day, can actually get some help and get something flagged by an AI and then review the flag. So what could go right, what could go wrong? Well, it's going to improve health outcomes. I have a friend who had breast cancer detected by one of these AI imaging systems. It was detected way, way earlier than it could have been by a human reader, as the story was told to her. And what could have been a life-altering, maybe life-ending problem turned out to be a relatively simple process of trying to overcome cancer. So in my own life, I've been very close to this extreme positive outcome. At the same time, AI classifiers for diagnosis, they're algorithms, they need to be trained. And when you think about training an algorithm, you're going to think, well, we need a data set. How do you make a data set that's fair, that's going to be just as good at reading Native American people as it is at reading white people, you know? How do you do that? And the answer is you cannot use a representative data set. You need roughly the same number of people in every single demographic category. So it's not representation that matters in a training data set, which causes huge problems because the number of people in small groups that might be demographically relevant to a health difference might be very, very small. You might have very little data on those people. In other words, your algorithm is being trained to be biased against people. There'll be much larger variance, much larger uncertainty among small groups who are not heavily represented in the training set. So this is just an example of how there could be hidden bias. And people sometimes think we've got a representative data set. That's how we're going to train our algorithm. That is not the way you train an algorithm. People need to learn that. They need to get good and smart about these things. All right, case study in education. Critical thinking. It's a vital skill, prized by employers of all kinds, but it's difficult to acquire and it's difficult to preserve. It's possible for it to atrophy. And these days it's possible for people to get through a university degree and have poor critical thinking skills. So how can AI help and how can AI harm? The new sorts of AI tutor tools that we've got are increasing students' critical abilities, improving critical skills and doing it very well. Doing it with the same type of modus operandi as you have with an in-person tutor who's doing Socratic questioning with someone one-on-one. That's incredibly useful for increasing critical thinking. But at the same time, AI dependence threatens critical thinking skills. The longitudinal studies, if you think, have we had time for longitudinal studies? And the answer is yes. And they're showing already that over-dependence on AI damages critical thinking skills in a fairly devastating way. For us in universities, you'd think, okay, it's not that big a deal, but imagine how stressed out people in K-12 education are over this issue. Then on administration, suppose we decided to train an AI algorithm to simplify the daunting challenge of admissions. What could go right and what could go wrong? Well, the thing that could go right is that you could save a lot of money, you could save a lot of time, you could increase the quality of life of people who are working through admissions files by culling and then leaving them the ones they really need to concentrate on. Right? There's so many positive things here that you can picture, but there are some bias impacts as well. Again, you're training an algorithm. The trained algorithm is going to be making decisions, recommendations, but how do you train? What do you tell it? It's called the cost function. What do you tell it is the correct way to assess a good application? Whatever you say in that regard is expressing a value, and that value is embedded in a complex cultural context. So it participates in the valuational structures of our society. Therefore, it's possible for there to be embedded bias in the way cost functions work and in the way you get data made available. And then there are workplace impacts as well. For everything I said that was positive about workplace changes a moment ago, you also can get the feeling, if you're in admissions, that now you're just basically operating at the behest of a program. And where's the human initiative and genius and the ability to read files deeply and catch the diamond in the rough, you know? Where's all that gone? So maybe there could be really frustrating aspects of that transformation too. So all of these ethical issues go directly to the dignity, value and welfare of all persons. In this case, not just the people whose files you're evaluating, but also the people who are doing the evaluation. Okay, so back in the day, we used to have some pretty sharp contrasts. We used to say computing and data sciences were useful, but the arts were glorious. We used to say computing and data science was technical, but the humanities were transformative. We used to say computing and data sciences are clever, and the social sciences are soulful. Well, that's just really gone now. It's past. AI is getting good enough that it can produce beautiful things, that it can produce soulful things, that it can produce accurate things. It can outcompete human beings on a host of tasks, not just playing chess, but also writing sermons. AI sermons are taking over in churches and synagogues and temples as people realise that it does a better job of not saying stupid things than ordained clergy do. So right now, we are ethically applying AI to advance every aspect of our university's mission. That's right now. We've been doing it for a couple of years. It's intense. We're doing it. We're not thinking about it. We're not planning for it only. We're also doing it. Right now, we're inviting every part of the university to deepen ethical understanding and critical skill in AI. And just think about the critical embrace policy that the university has adopted. Professors can assert their freedom to have whatever policy they want, but they can't neglect teaching students about AI. So they have to explain their policy. Right now, we're thinking through ethical challenges that AI is forcing on us. And you don't need to go very far in computing and data sciences or in public health or in medicine or in biomedical engineering in order to be able to see examples where AI is kicking up things that require careful thought. AI and algorithms in the law school. It's all through the university. People are trying to get ahead of it. They're using their genius, their imaginations, their experience to try and get out ahead of these problems that we know are coming. And all the time we're thinking about human dignity, human value, and human well-being. We're training a new generation of students in non-reductive ethical approaches to AI. In CDS, for example, if you want to graduate as a major or a minor, you have to take an ethics class. And every single professor in CDS is required to address ethics when it comes up in their classes. Not just a specialised course, and certainly not an elective course, But every single time it comes up, professors have to deal with it. And in various parts of the university elsewhere, when ethical issues come up, professors are trying to deal with it. And right now, we're recruiting a new generation of faculty and staff dedicated to excellence in the ethical use of AI. That's happening in the AI cluster hires, for example, where people coming in don't just know about AI, they also tend to know about the ethics of AI. And right now, we're anticipating a complex AI future and working to solve emerging problems before they arrive. So I want to say that Boston University is demonstrating that a person-centred ethics can help navigate the AI era. And I want to say as clearly as I can that we really are out ahead of most other universities when we do this. We're out ahead of the University of Michigan, for example. This is one of the dimensions of the work in AIDA that's capable of being landmark leadership type stuff. Not just follow along and try and solve the problems as they arise, but getting out ahead and making sure that we have a large, lasting impact on universities far and wide. Thank you for your attention. If you want to know where some of those images came from,